Hello and welcome back, guys. So this week's X-Men 97 Weapon X, Lies, and DVDs drags Wolverine and his eclectic Team X back into the frozen lab which started all the adamantium business, and Dr. Abraham Cornelius is still alive there. Briefly. Because he immediately splits open into something horrific and summons a swarm, turning out to be Patient Zero in a facility crawling with similar snarling insectoids who have already gotten inside the people who worked there. Anyone who's read an X-Men comic since 1982 sat bolt upright because these are the Brood. Finally and properly in all their glory. The Brood kind of look like they wandered off the set of Alien, and everyone's first instinct is to call them a ripoff. Which maybe isn't a lie, but it's sure as hell not the truth. In the comics, the Brood are a parasitic hive that infects you, rewrites your body, keeps your memories, keeps your powers, and genuinely enjoys every second of the terror it causes on the way. Marvel has flat out compared them to demons. So today, we're dissecting the gnarly anatomy of the Brood, how the infection actually works, why a mutant host is the worst case scenario imaginable, and why these things nearly ended the X-Men entirely. Let's engage. Who are the Brood and where did they come from? Let's start with the most random origin story in comics, because the Brood basically exist by accident. They first appeared in the Uncanny X-Men number 155, March 1982, created by Chris Claremont and David Cockrum. And Cockrum was honest about how it happened. Claremont's notes had said Deathbird would be accompanied by miscellaneous alien henchmen, and that was the whole brief, so he drew exactly that. He drew Deathbird standing in a half-built structure and, in his own words, he drew the most horrible-looking thing he could think of next to her. Claremont took one look at these disposable background goons and thought, oh, these things are getting their own saga. In-universe, they're obviously much grander. The Brood are insectoid parasites who've been terrorizing space for eons, and they've been described as the universe's first galactic predators, with nests established on tens of thousands of worlds. Their actual origin has been deliberately kept murky. Uncanny X-Men 166 said outright that nobody really knows, which is a good idea for something so old and so gross. Later accounts claim they spawned in a dark galaxy before Galactus was even around, or that they came from another universe entirely, found spawning in the dark matter flow of a collapsed one. And then there's an ultra-creepy possibility from later X-Men lore. Kree scientists studying the Alpha Hive found evidence suggesting the Brood might have been manufactured. I don't even want to imagine what kind of creature is capable of that. Contrary to what you might think, their defining trait isn't hunger, it's cruelty. The Brood aren't mindless animals doing what predators in nature do. No, they intentionally cause suffering and knowingly enjoy it. Especially the terror their infection produces in a host who knows exactly what's about to happen. How does Brood infection actually work on a host? Reminding you this is an anatomy video, so we've got to get into the mechanics, which are grim, to say the least. A Brood queen, and it has to be a queen, this isn't something the ordinary drones can do. She implants an embryo into a host, usually via a scorpion-like tail. The first horror is that there's no waiting time, no chance to save yourself, because this connection is immediate. The moment that egg is in you, you're wired into the hive mind. The hive mind is just the start, the takeover is next. The embryo gestates and slowly consumes the host body first, then personality. Marvel's own description is that the host consciousness gets subjugated by the new Brood one. The original you doesn't simply get put to sleep, no, you get thoroughly consumed, and you're awake for all of it. It's similar to Star Trek's Borg, just organic, though the Brood was first by a fair few years. And now the part that makes them an X-Men problem specifically. The resulting Brood doesn't simply keep the host's memories, but also the host's powers. I'll spell it out for you. A mutant host produces a mutant Brood. So it isn't just a monster who's wearing your face. It's the monster who's taken your face, your history, and your entire power set, with everything that made you scraped out, and a hive consciousness poured into that cavity instead. So I'll tell you to reframe the image of the Brood you've got, because they're not conquerors so much as a harvesting operation. Every world they hit is an insane kind of shopping trip, and every ability they encounter gets added to the Brood Hive catalog permanently. 97 gives us a good look at this when Logan turns on his own team, and that's lifted straight from the comics, as we'll see. How similar are the Brood to Aliens' Xenomorphs, and where do they differ? Let's address the elephant in the room, or, well, the giant wasp thing. No, I don't mean the wasp or the thing. Yes, obviously there are comparisons to Alien. Alien came out in 1979. The Brood showed up in 1982. Yeah, Cochrum's original design is essentially a xenomorph crossed with a wasp, and Claremont was known to borrow from sci-fi. Plus, Marvel's own database says plainly that the Brood resembled the Xenomorphs, and John Byrne even later admitted he drew Kitty Pryde based on what he thought a young Sigourney Weaver looked like. The whole editorial had Alien on the brain. The similarities are definitely real. Both are parasitic aliens, have implanted embryos, use host bodies as nurseries for the continuation of the species, hive hierarchies with an empress at the top. Though, I'll say that the Brood had a queen years before James Cameron gave the Xenomorphs one in Aliens, 1986. But three differences make the Brood their own species entirely. First, Xenomorph eggs hatch. Incubation, chest burster, death of host, done. Brood eggs convert you instead, which we've covered already and which is torture in a different way. Second, and this is the big one, Xenomorphs are extraterrestrial animals. Mostly. The Brood are people, sort of. By people, I mean that they talk, build technology, fly in ships, wield weapons, negotiate treaties, and sit on political councils. They're properly conscious creatures. A xenomorph can't even lie to you, but a Brood queen can run a decade-long infiltration. And third, the X-Men's response is something you'd never get in an Alien film. Faced with parasites actively eating them from the inside, the X-Men still stop to agonize over whether they're morally permitted to kill them. Mind you, Ripley would have flushed the airlock 90 minutes ago, and then taken a nap with the cat. That's how you know that these aren't horror film monsters dropped into Marvel. They're specifically built for a universe where the heroes have a code and the monsters know it. What are the Brood's queens, hive mind, and castes like? There are 4 distinct tiers to the Brood because organization is a skill even power-consuming insectoid horrors have. At the bottom, the smaller winged drones, the ones Wolverine contemptuously nicknamed sleazoids, and they can fly. They've got transparent wings and flexible abdomens they keep coiled. They usually make up the swarm. Above them, you've got the Brood queens, larger, round-bodied, and the only caste that can implant an embryo, which makes them extremely crucial to the species. Third is the firstborn, who are the direct offspring of the Empress, born without host bodies, heavily armored, capable of short-range teleportation, and used purely to enforce the Empress's will and crush any queen who gets above her caste. And above them all is the Empress Brood herself, a massive horned entity who decides which broodlings become queens and which stay warriors. Every one of them is armed by default. Not only do they have natural body armor, but their teeth are weapons of their own. Plus they've got the stingers loaded with either paralyzing or lethal venom, depending on the hive's mood. Also, and this is a bizarre bit which is actually canon, the Brood can produce a golden milk rich in something called vitamin F negative, which softens bones and is apparently worth a fortune on the black market. But the most dangerous part of them is the hive mind. Information moves instantly across the entire species. In the original saga, the Queen tracks the X-Men because the embryo she planted in Cyclops basically calls her up and tells her where they're headed. The call is coming from inside. Their own team leader, and that's their undoing. The most extreme standard that the Brood follow is that when a Brood is born with anything resembling kindness or empathy, it's classed as a defect and killed at birth. Not ignored or thrown out into exile, but immediately executed. Compassion is a birth defect to these things. Remember that because it comes back at the end of this video in the best possible way. What are the Akanti, and why do the Brood fly around inside corpses? If you think the Brood can't get worse, just wait until I tell you that they've combined animal cruelty and slavery into a way to travel. The Brood don't build ships. No, instead they fly on the Akanti, enormous sentient, gentle space whales that drift between the stars and sing. This process is actually so much worse than simply enslave, because the Brood hunts them down, injecting them with a slaver virus that destroys their higher reasoning while leaving their physical body functional. A lobotomy, essentially. They then hollow out the living body, build habitation chambers inside it, and eat the animal's internal tissue for food during the voyage. The Akanti is the ship, the meal, and the prisoner all at once, and it's alive through all of it. The worst part is what they did to the prophet singer, a specific member of the Akanti who acts as the caretaker and living repository for the entire race's collective racial soul. When one dies, it's meant to hurl itself into a star so the soul can pass on. But what Brood did was capture the prophet singer, ride him for years, then crash him onto Slee's world. They built their throne city out of his rotting carcass, with the soul still trapped in the skull. And you understand what that means, right? No star, no release, no successor, and the entire species remains chained to a corpse forever. How unimaginably cruel. But that's where Storm comes in, and her arc here is extraordinary. Facing her own transformation, Ororo chooses to die on her own terms rather than become part of the Brood. She purges the embryo by drawing down the raw power of the galactic core, and it kills her. She's floating dead in space when a free Akanti swallows her. It's a newborn prophet singer, born prematurely, its mind too fragile to survive. And the solution is that they bond. The Akanti heals her body, and Storm's consciousness gives the infant the awareness it needs to live. All I'll say to end this section is that the Akanti deserve better. Hell, everyone who encounters the Brood deserves better. How did the original Brood Saga nearly destroy the X-Men? Now this is why they're legendary. The Brood Saga runs across Uncanny X-Men number 155 to 167, with the main event in number 161 to 167 by Claremont, Cockrum, and Paul Smith. The setup is basically Deathbird allies with the Brood to depose her sister Lilandra and seize the Shi'ar throne. As payment, she hands them Lilandra, the X-Men, Carol Danvers, and the Imperial Guardsman Fang. Everyone gets an embryo implanted in them, everyone that is except Carol, who we'll come back to because the Brood plans something far more interesting for her. And the stakes are diabolical because it isn't just a will they escape, but it's a countdown. Every X-Man in this saga is a bomb about to go off, and when it explodes, they don't die. That would be too easy. Instead, they'll wake up as a Brood holding all their old powers and start hunting their friends. Fang turns in issue number 162, and they can't save him. It's the first time we watch the process happen to someone we've met. Wolverine's healing factor burns his infection out, which makes him the only one who can see through the Brood's illusions, and lands him with the worst job in comics. He decides he'll have to mercy kill every one of his friends before they turn if he has to. And, oh, he does have to. But in issue number 166, with his claws out and his teammates changing in front of him, he can't bring himself to do it. Then Cyclops goes over completely and turns on the team, which means that Wolverine's mercy costs them the battle. But they are saved, of course, and it's a whale that does it. Binary tears open the crystal chamber and frees the prophet singer's soul. It unites with Storm's newborn, and the grateful soul sweeps back through the X-Men and purges every embryo, while turning the Brood Queen into solid crystal. Slee's world then detonates from the sheer force of what Carol did. Xavier is saved only because the Starjammers can pour his consciousness into a cloned body, which, as a side effect, lets him walk again. The arc's real legacy is having proved that cosmic horror could be intimate, and also it left Professor X so shaken that he went and founded the New Mutants. But that's another story. How did the Brood turn Carol Danvers into Binary? I already teased this, and now we get to go into detail about Carol's story during the Brood Saga. So when the Brood grabbed the team, they implanted everyone, except Carol. As we all know, she's a human-Kree hybrid, and that made her interesting enough not to be used as a host immediately. What they did use her for was experiments. The Brood spent most of issue number 163 trying to force her body to evolve past its limits, purely to see what they could make. It definitely worked, but it absolutely didn't work out for the Brood. In Uncanny X-Men number 164, which is Dave Cockrum's final issue on the book, and he went out introducing one last iconic design, Carol Danvers emerged as Binary, a cosmic scale being capable of tapping the energy of a white hole. She's a living star, the Brood's worst enemy accidentally created by them, and she immediately turned around and took their whole fleet apart. It gave her 4 decades of unfinished business, and the Brood have never stopped trying to correct the error. In Contest of Champions 2, they posed as a benevolent race called the Kotiri, sponsoring a superhero tournament. What happened here was that the Brood Queen dumped her mind into Rogue's body, meaning Carol had to face a parasite in the body of the woman who'd already stolen her powers and memories once. Man, Carol just never gets a break in any decade, no matter what storyline is happening. Nor can Rogue, actually. And it all came due in Revenge of the Brood, starting in Captain Marvel number 43, where the Brood Empress makes very sure Carol doesn't slip away twice. They let her through their clutches once, and in doing so, created one of their worst enemies, and they're smart enough that they won't make that mistake again. What happened when the Brood invaded New Orleans? This is an absolute fever dream of a comic, and it's so bizarre that I have to include this as its own section. 1992's Brood Trouble in the Big Easy starts as a Gambit story. Don't skip this section, okay? I promise it gets good. So, Remy's estranged wife, Belladonna Boudreaux, turns up at the mansion to drag him home to New Orleans, which is news to most of the X-Men who did not know he was married. Their arranged marriage was supposed to end the war between the Thieves Guild and the Assassins Guild, but definitely has not ended the war, and bodies are piling up. Then the actual reason for the body count is revealed. The Assassins Guild has been infested by the Brood. A street-level Gambit family drama turns out to be an epic battle, with the enemy being an insectoid alien parasite nest in the New Orleans underworld. I told you, it gets good. Meanwhile, Danny Ketch, the Ghost Rider, because yeah, he's here already in the city. And the Brood get him, which means you've got a supernatural flaming skull on a hell cycle with an alien hive driving his mind. The X-Men have to break him free before they can even start on the actual enemy, which they do. And then it all ends in a proper monster movie showdown against the Brood Queen in the tunnels under the city, with Johnny Blaze along for the ride. It's epic, it's ridiculous, it should not work, but it does. This particular storyline is the best to show off the Brood's range. You could drop them into a southern gothic crime story about warring guilds and they work, because the real horror doesn't come from the monsters being from space. It comes from how everyone in the room might already be one of them. How have the Brood turned Wolverine and others into walking nightmares? The Denver arc is the other big issue I'll be talking about in this video, because it's the one 97 is pulling from directly. Uncanny X-Men number 232 to 234. This one shows the Brood as an Earth-based infestation led by Harry Palmer, a human paramedic turned Brood. He's building an army which happens to be the nightmare the original saga only threatened. Yes, it's a squad of Brood mutants. The members at the moment are people you may not have heard of, like Temptress, who enslaves people with pheromones, or Tension, who extends his arms to strangle, plus Whiphand, who fires energy bands that scramble your nervous system. And then there's Spitball, a Denver lawyer who spits plasma. But these are mutants with a power set, and they pack more than a punch once you've crossed them over with the Brood. The climax is one for the history books. Wolverine himself gets turned. Mark Silvestri's cover for number 234 goes so hard that Marvel turned it into a statue, and it's that exact image that shapes this week's episode of X-Men 97. So no, the Brood don't usually beat the X-Men. Instead, they make the X-Men into the thing that beats them, and then sit back and enjoy the show. How have the Brood shaped Marvel's cosmic history? The Brood have an actual role in Marvel's sprawling timeline. For one, attacking Earth isn't new for them. They hit Egypt in 2620 BC, infecting a pharaoh during the Second Dynasty, and the coalition that formed to throw them out was assembled by Imhotep and included a young Apocalypse. Yes, that Apocalypse. This alliance is actually what inspired the founding of the Brotherhood of the Shield, the ancient order that eventually becomes the Shield we all know. Nick Fury's entire organization exists downstream of a freaking Brood invasion. And they're skillful political operators in the space hierarchy. In Bendis and Steve McNiven's Guardians of the Galaxy #2, a Brood Queen turns up as a sitting member of the Galactic Council, making policy alongside the Shi'ar. It also gets gleefully stupid, like Roxxon is allowed to weaponize them, sending Brood-infected wolves after Weapon H, going on to infect drones, space sharks, and then there's somehow a Brood-infected human riding an Akanti. The point I'm making is that they're not the X-Men's pest problem. They're a galactic institution, old enough to have shaped human history, diplomatic enough to hold a council seat, and cheap enough that a corporation can rent them. Can you cure a Brood infection? And should the X-Men wipe them out? So is there a way back? Sure, but they're rare and never clean. The options are all ugly. Purge it with a healing factor, which works if you're Wolverine, or Honey Badger, who got a queen embryo in all-new Wolverine and ended up taking over the nest and ruling it. She only escaped because her regeneration eventually burned the thing out. I'll lay out the ways. First, you can kill the queen and hope it falls, and even then, it's all hope. You could break the hive's control telepathically, which is how Ghost Rider got free in New Orleans. You could also extract it with technology, but almost nobody has that advanced a tech. Xavier survived, but he had to leave his body behind to do it. And Carol's recovery wasn't recovery at all, really, since she was permanently rewritten into someone else by the Brood's experiments. And here we go with something a little controversial. By Revenge of the Brood, the X-Men have concluded the species can't be treated, contained, or reasoned with, and start seriously discussing extermination. In one meeting, Bishop proposes building a mindless clone of the Scarlet Witch, controlling it, and having it say, "No more Brood," a deliberate echo of the line that decimated mutant kind in House of M. Psylocke and Magic tell him it's an appalling idea, and they are not wrong, but Bishop is also not entirely wrong, which shows you just how difficult a discussion this is, and also how damn scared they must be to discuss this at all. So the X-Men, a blatant allegory for hated minorities, who routinely face calls for their own eradication, end up debating genocide. That's the biggest and most devastating impact they leave on the X-Men. They don't just take their bodies, but they inspire such fear and paranoia that even the good guys start sounding like Bolivar Trask. Are the Brood just mindless monsters, or can they evolve beyond the hive? And we finish on the exception, which builds on that birth defect I mentioned earlier. If you're kind, you're dead as a baby. For this, I introduce you to Broo. I'm not kidding with that name. He first appeared in Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, number 40, July 2011, created by Christos Gage and Julian Bobbio. Not a Jason Aaron creation, which is a common error. Aaron named and developed him later, born in a lab on the Sword Station, Pandora's Box. And Broo is completely wrong by Brood standards. He's intelligent, gentle, non-violent, and he understands friendship and affection, which, as we established, is normally a death sentence at birth. He only survived because the Brood population had crashed so badly the Queen couldn't afford to lose anyone, and even then he's had repeated attempts on his life. He ended up a student at the Jean Grey School, named by Oya, or Temper, a mutant who can control and relate temperature, which allows her to create extreme heat as well as freezing ice. Wearing glasses because he thought they made him look less intimidating. He's so cute, just look at him. He proposed marriage to Oya on their first meeting. He befriended Fin Fang Foom, and then in the Krakoa era, because it's always the Krakoa era, he accidentally ate a Kree bioweapon called the King Egg and became King of the Brood. And what did he do with his powers? He immediately assumed command of the entire species, making them free slaves and actually hunting down slavers. Unfortunately, this didn't hold. The demon Nightmare got into Broo's head and tore a faction loose from his control, which is what kicks off the Revenge of the Brood. Broo has to watch his own species murder his friends while he can't stop it. The question here is whether this exception is the only one. If one Brood can break the hive's cruelty, then their cruelty isn't a given, which I have to say means that they're not an inherent evil. Instead, they're a species that chooses to kill and torture. Yikes. Alright guys, that's the Brood. In a universe where most cosmic threats are terrifying because of scale, the planet-eating Galactus, the solar system-ending Phoenix, the Brood invert this idea completely. Their horror is intimate. They don't cause the end of the world, but the end of you. from the inside while you're awake, wearing your own face afterwards. So the only real question left is which hero's anatomy they hijack next, and how long before the hive starts speaking in a voice we recognize. Let me know in the comments who you'd least want infected. Smash that like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!